Hello everyone. Today we will be learning about the lumbar vertebrae. The lumbar vertebrae are 5 in number which occupy the lumbar region of the vertebral column. So here are the 5 lumbar vertebrae. Here is the L1 vertebra, here is the L2 vertebra, the L3 vertebra, L4 vertebra and the L5 vertebra. Only the 5th lumbar vertebra presents some special features. The rest all lumbar vertebrae present common features. Hence, the L1 to L4 vertebra are the typical lumbar vertebrae and the 5th lumbar vertebra is a atypical lumbar vertebra. Now, the distinguishing feature of lumbar vertebra is one is big size of body. The body of lumbar vertebra is of big size when compared to the bodies of other vertebrae. And then there is the absence of costal facets on body. We know that the vertebral bodies of the thoracic vertebrae has got costal facets. So there are no costal facets on the body of lumbar vertebra. And then foramen transversarium is absent in lumbar vertebrae. So foramen transversarium is a distinguishing feature of cervical vertebrae. So foramen transversarium is not present in lumbar vertebrae. Now let's see in detail the characteristics of a typical lumbar vertebra. Now, the main parts of a typical lumbar vertebra are the body, the vertebral foramen, the pedicles, the laminae, spinous process, superior articular processes, inferior articular processes and the transverse processes. Now, let's see each of these parts. First of all, the body. Here is the body. Here is the body of the lumbar vertebra. And then comes the vertebral foramen. So here is the vertebral foramen and then the pedicles. Here are the two pedicles which connect the body with the neural arch. Then the laminae. Here comes the two laminae. Then the spinous process. Here is the spinous process which projects posteriorly and downwards. And then comes the articular processes. The articular processes are of two, superior articular processes and inferior articular processes. The superior articular processes which projects upwards these are the superior articular processes, the two superior articular processes. And then the inferior articular processes. Here are the two inferior articular processes, the two inferior articular processes with their facets. Then comes the transverse processes which projects laterally. These are the two transverse processes. Now let's see each of these parts in detail. First of all, about the body. So here comes the body of lumbar vertebra. The body is large in size. So big size body is a distinguishing feature of lumbar vertebra. So the body is large size and its transverse measurement is more than anteroposterior measurement. So hold the bone in anatomical position and here is the transverse measurement of the body and here is the anteroposterior measurement of the body, and you can see that the transverse measurement is more than the anteroposterior measurement. Now let's see the attachments to the body. First of all, the muscle psoas major, it takes origin from the body of all lumbar vertebrae. So psoas major muscle takes origin from the sides of the bodies of all 5 lumbar vertebrae, and then the anterior surface of the body gives attachment to the crura of diaphragm. So the crura of diaphragm arises from upper 3 lumbar vertebrae on right side and from first 2 lumbar vertebrae on left side. Okay, so the anterior surface of the body gives attachment to the crura of diaphragm. So the crura of diaphragm gets attached to the upper 3 lumbar vertebrae on right side and to the upper 2 lumbar vertebrae on left side. So here are the 5 lumbar vertebrae, and what you see here are the anterior surfaces of the bodies of the lumbar vertebrae, and the attachment of the crura of diaphragm comes onto the anterior surfaces of the bodies of the lumbar vertebrae. We know that diaphragm consists of a right crest and a left crest. So the right crest of the diaphragm is attached to the anterior surfaces of the bodies of upper 3 lumbar vertebrae, while the left crest of the diaphragm is attached to the anterior surfaces of bodies of only first 2 lumbar vertebrae. So, the crura of diaphragm is attached to the anterior surface of bodies of upper 3 lumbar vertebrae on the right side and to the upper 2 lumbar vertebrae on the left side. So, on the right side, the right crest of diaphragm is attached to the anterior surfaces of the bodies of L1, L2 and L3 vertebrae, and on the left side, the crura of diaphragm is attached to the anterior surfaces of the bodies of L1 and L2 vertebrae. Next is about the vertebral foramen. So, here comes the vertebral foramen. The vertebral foramen, as you can see, it is triangular in shape. So, the shape of the vertebral foramen is triangular. It is triangular in shape. And next part is the pedicle. Here are the two pedicles. The pedicles are short and strong. They are very short and they are strong. And the pedicles arise from posterolateral aspect of the body just below its upper border. So, the pedicles are attached to the posterolateral aspect of the body. So, here is the posterior aspect of the body and here is the lateral aspect of the body, and the pedicles, the attachment of the pedicle comes to the posterolateral aspect of the body just below its upper border. So, here is the upper border of the body and the pedicles are attached just below its upper border. So, when you look from here, you can see that the attachment of the pedicle is somewhat near to the upper border of the body. Next, let's see about the laminae. So, here are the two laminae. The laminae are short, strong and broad. So, you can see that the laminae are short and they are strong and they are broad. So, the laminae are short, strong and broad. And next we are going to see about the spinous process. So, here comes the spinous process or the spine, and the spine is quadrangular in shape. So, the shape of the spine is quadrangular. So, here you can distinguish the quadrangular shape. The spine of lumbar vertebrae is quadrangular. So, this is a distinguishing feature of lumbar vertebrae, that is the presence of quadrangular shaped spine, and the spine projects horizontally backward. So, the direction of the spine is it projects horizontally backward, and the spine is thick along its posterior and inferior borders. So, here is the superior border of the spine, here is the posterior border of the spine, and here is the inferior border of the spine, and you can notice that here is the posterior border and the inferior border. At the posterior border and the inferior border, the spine is thick. So, the spine is thick along its posterior border and the inferior border. Next, we are going to see the superior articular processes. The superior articular processes projects upwards. So, here are the two superior articular processes projecting upwards, and you can see the superior articular facet here. Here is the superior articular facet and here is the other superior articular facet, and you can see that the superior articular facets face backwards and medially. So, the direction of the superior articular facets, they face backwards and medially. The superior articular facets are facing backwards and medially, and the posterior border of the superior articular process has a rough elevation or a process called as mammillary process. So, here you can see an elevation or a process, and that process is called mammillary process. It is present on the posterior border of the superior articular process. So, here is the superior articular process, and when you hold the bone in anatomical position, this is the posterior border of the superior articular process, and there is a rough elevation or a process there, and this process is called mammillary process. Here is the mammillary process, and that's all about the superior articular process. And next, let's see about the inferior articular process. So, here are the two inferior articular processes. The inferior articular processes, they project downwards, and here is the inferior articular facet and here is the other inferior articular facet, and the inferior articular facets, they face forwards and laterally. So hold the bone in anatomical position and the inferior articular facets, they face forwards and laterally. See, the inferior articular facets, they are facing forwards and laterally. Finally, coming to the transverse processes, these are the two transverse processes. The transverse processes are thin and elongated. So you can see that the transverse processes are thin and elongated, and at the posterior aspect of each transverse process, there is a rough elevation. So here you can see an elevation here at the posterior aspect of each transverse process. So hold the bone in anatomical position, and here are the two transverse processes, and here comes the posterior aspect of the transverse processes, and here you can see an elevation, a rough elevation, and this elevation is called as accessory process. So here are the two accessory processes. Accessory processes are rough elevations present at the posterior aspect of each transverse process. So here is the mammillary process, which is present in the posterior border of the superior articular process, and here is the accessory process, which is a elevation present at the posterior aspect of the transverse process. So here is the mammillary process and here is the accessory process. So here is the mammillary process of this side and here is the accessory process. And the one muscle attachment to the transverse process is that of psoas major muscle. Psoas major muscle takes origin from the transverse processes of all 5 lumbar vertebrae. So that's all about the lumbar vertebrae. I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching.